Yay. Yay.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our episode of Awesome Adaptations. I'm Melissa Yapel, and I have with me Jen Dennison from the Division of Wildlife and Lindsay Rist, who is going to be presenting to us shortly about awesome animal adaptations that we find in our forest habitats. So we have one more webinar after this in this series, and it'll be next Wednesday at 10 about creatures of our streams and rivers. So don't miss that one. And if you want to find out how to hunt for fossils around the state of Ohio, you can join us Tuesday at 10 next week, and we'll tell you all the best places to go to find awesome fossils of marine animals or land creatures of our ancient times. So hope to see you for that as well. But I'm going to pass it over to Lindsay now, and we will get started this morning. Lindsay?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Rist, and I'm a wildlife communications specialist for the Division of Wildlife in Southeast Ohio. I'm in the Athens office, and I've been here about 9 years, so it seemed appropriate living in the most forested portion of the state to talk to you about forest animals today. So give me a second to switch this over. And we are going to talk about forest wildlife today. This is a tree frog on the front here, and we are going to talk a little bit about those. I picked some of the animals that I like and just I think have interesting features. If there's other animals that you want to know about, we do have other resources available, or feel free to type a question into the chat box and we'll try to get to those during the presentation. What we're going to cover today, we are going to talk a little bit about adaptations and habitats, what those words mean, and how that plays into what we're talking about. We'll talk specifically about what makes a forest, why wildlife and humans need these important ecosystems. Then we'll get into the adaptations of some of the species that I've chosen for today. And then we'll finish up with where to look for some of these wildlife species and how you can identify things yourself at a later time. So an adaptation is any behavioral or physical characteristic of an animal that helps it survive in its environment. So everything is going to have some sort of adaptation based on where it lives. And it might have more than one adaptation to help with different parts of its life cycle or just different areas that it lives at different times of the year. These fall into three main categories. So we've got body parts, body coverings, and behaviors. So this is an eyed click beetle in the photo that I have here. Those aren't actually its eyes. Those are just body markings that make it look like eyes so that it looks more threatening to would-be predators. And then any or all of these types of adaptations play a critical role in the survival of an animal, which is partly why it would be found in one area maybe and not another, or why it has been able to thrive in one area when it's not doing as well in another area. So if we want to talk about specifically what is a habitat, it's the natural home of an animal, plant, or other organism, the area where it lives. And it's where it can find everything that it needs to survive, which includes food, water, shelter, and space. And humans need these four things as well. So this is, we're talking about any animal or species here is going to need these four things. And if we look a little closer, we can distinguish wild animals from domestic animals by looking at these habitat requirements. For domestic animals, humans are going to provide many, if not all, of the habitat components for those animals. Wild animals, though, are finding these components all by themselves. They're able to hunt and find their food, they're able to find water sources, they build or find their own shelter, and they should have plenty of space in the area where they live. Specific to forests, there are different types, but the main classification to make it a forest is that it's an area that's primarily composed of woody vegetation and the understory vegetation. Woody vegetation is going to include trees and shrubs. It's the structure of the plant that is more rigid and allows it to grow taller than herbaceous vegetation like grasses and flowers. But you are going to have that understory vegetation in there as well. I did put in here, though, there's a notable absence of other land uses. So things like a Christmas tree farm or an orchard, they wouldn't really be considered a forest, even though they're primarily composed of that woody vegetation, because they're being used for other things. And typically those areas don't have the understory vegetation. They're maintained to allow optimal growth of those trees. Climate, soil type, seed source can all determine the type of forest that is growing in an area. There are different types of forests, and they'd be classified different ways. So, you know, I think most people are familiar with rainforests. These are areas that are found in tropical areas and receive a lot of rainfall. Temperate forests dominate that mid-latitude areas, both north and south of the equator. They're characterized by broadleaf tree species that are going to create a canopy. And then there's the boreal forests, too, that are found in the northern hemisphere. And those are comprised of trees and plants that are able to survive in snowy and extremely cold temperatures. We can also, though, classify forests by what type of trees are found in that specific location. So it could be a deciduous forest that's composed of broadleaves, a pine forest that's composed of evergreen trees. And then you might even get more specific and say this is an oak hickory forest because the dominating species there are oak trees and hickory trees. So there are a lot of different ways that we could say what type of forest it is. And the forest cover has changed drastically in Ohio over time, which has affected the wildlife species that are found here as well. So over on the left-hand side, this is just a picture description of kind of the forest cover and what wildlife have been found over the past 200 plus years. This is a poster that is available from the Division of Wildlife that has this depiction on it. So the far left side in 1803, you can see that Ohio was mostly forest covered. There was a lot of trees. And then as European settlement came through and we had a lot of people that were clearing land for agricultural purposes, they were cutting down trees to use for lumber. You can see in the middle there by 1903, it was very low coverage of forest land still left in Ohio. As of 2003, we have increased that. This is one of the habitat types that had been increasing as people realized the importance of trees and that some of these areas weren't well suited to agriculture, things like that. And you can kind of follow along with the wildlife species there too. There was good diversity and abundance of species. In the original picture from 1803, you can see when we've lost the habitat, there aren't as many wildlife species found. Some things have been since extirpated from the state, meaning that they're not found here at all anymore. And then by 2003, we've actually been able to bring some of those species back, and we have higher abundance of some of those as well. So, you know, when we're looking, yeah.
Oh, sorry. A question came in and asked, why has wildlife grown in 2003?
Yeah, so that's as we're looking at that habitat, you know, our joke kind of with wildlife management is the whole build it and they will come thing. If there's no habitat here for that specific animal, then they're going to go other places to find it. So as that picture in 2003 shows, that as our forest habitat increased and we were more aware of providing good places for those animals to live and thrive, then we've been able to have some of them have come back on their own, and some of them have been reintroduction programs. So for example, if you look in 1903, there are no deer depicted on that picture. White-tailed deer and wild turkey both were completely gone from the state of Ohio, but have been able to come back with having that habitat available and being more cognizant of the needs of those wildlife. So why are forests important, both to humans and wildlife? You benefits to humans, we use wood products all the time. Trees taking carbon dioxide and producing oxygen, and they provide recreational opportunities. A lot of people like to get out and do things, go hiking. There are some trails for even ATVs and bicycles and things like that. For wildlife, they do provide a diversity of habitats, specifically, and some of what we're going to talk about today is the arboreal species, which are ones that live in trees. And this basically gives them an access to food sources that are unavailable to other animals that can't get to that height, and an escape from predators. Additional benefits just of forests in general: they help prevent soil erosion, protect watersheds, and can help mitigate climate change. So the adaptations, I've kind of broken them down into different categories for today. I've got some examples of camouflage, feeding and foraging, maneuverability, how do they get around and why that's important, nesting behavior, and then mimicry. So the first one, we already, I mentioned white-tailed deer earlier, and so this might be kind of a strange example of camouflage. When I do presentations for younger groups, camps or schools or something, and we talk about camouflage, it seems a lot of people think that it's the brown, green clothing that people wear to blend in, and that's the description of camouflage. But camouflage is actually just the ability to blend in with your surroundings so that you're not seen by predators. So a white-tailed deer fawn has spots, and these actually will help look like sunspots on the ground. So if you think of canopy cover in a forest, the leaves are not solid. They're gonna let some sunlight through, and then that's what creates the sunspots on the ground. So when they have the spots on their back, the nature of fawns is that they have no scent and they are going to lay motionless. The doe is going to leave them there so as not to draw attention to them. So they lay there motionless, she leaves, and they can blend in with the ground and not be, they're not brightly colored, they're not drawing attention to themselves. And, the hope is that something would just look right past them. They can't detect movement, they can't detect a large difference in color from the landscape and things like that. So this is a defense mechanism for the survival of the fawn by blending in with the forest floor. This picture was more in a grassland area, but just having that breakup in the color pattern too will just help them blend in with their different surroundings. So some birds are brightly colored, and some of them though are colored to blend in with their surroundings. And I thought a wood thrush was a good example of this. It's a little bit harder to see in this picture, but the back of their body and their feathers are a brown color. Wood thrushes forage in the leaf litter of the forest floor looking for insects and vertebrates. They even eat snails and things like that. So as they're hopping around, most of the leaves after they fall into the ground are going to turn a brown color. So then the wood thrush is able to blend in with that, especially things that are looking down from above because it's the same color as the leaves. Just in general, males are more brightly colored to help attract a mate, and the females are going to be the one that are more dull in color because that aids them in the camouflage, especially when it comes to nesting, which I've got another example of in a little bit. When we talk about feeding and foraging, this is a picture of a white-eyed vireo, and you can see that it's using its feet to grasp onto the branches. So if you had watched the earlier series from this, I know they had talked about like ducks, waterfowl and stuff, they're going to have flatter feet. They've got webbed feet for walking, for paddling water, to be able to swim. But when we were looking at forest birds, ones that are going to hang out a lot in trees, they need those grasping limbs to be able to hold on to the branches. And then vireos spend most of their time sitting on these branches. They'll walk back and forth, and they're gleaning insects off of there. So having the ability to stay on that branch and walk around is helpful to them. If you also take a look at its beak, it's got a smaller beak because it's mostly eating insects and smaller things that it finds. And in comparison to this cardinal, if you see, it's got a much bigger beak, and it's using that to crack seeds. So beak adaptations are really big based on the food source that that bird is using. So that beak shape is really going to come into play. The other one that I want to show in terms of feeding, this is a downy woodpecker. And you can see that it's got this long bill for probing into trees to find insects. And it also has a really thick skull. Woodpeckers get their name from pecking at the wood, and they can peck their heads really fast, either to vibrate to bring the insects, get them moving so that they can find them, or in some cases to actually drill into the tree to get in there to the insects that are inside the tree. That thick skull will protect their brain from the repeated pounding. They also have a long tongue that they can use to get in there. I couldn't find the picture of it to use in this, but there's actually, some of them have a ridge. They can curl that tongue up around their skull because they need extra room to store it when they're not sticking it out to look for insects. When we talk about maneuverability, how are these animals getting around? And one of my favorites is the southern flying squirrel. So the name is a little misleading. They don't actually fly, they're going to glide. They have extra skin between all of their arms and legs, and this basically creates more surface area and a resistance so that they can glide. They're nocturnal and mostly spend all their times in the treetops, so we don't see them a lot, although there are claims that they're the most numerous squirrel in Ohio, even though we don't see them as frequently as we do other squirrel species. And so they're going to be able to hop from tree to tree in the top without coming down, and just be able to stay up there in the air longer to get, basically then they can jump further and do different things. And then that's going to allow them a different food source than other squirrels. The picture of this one, it is coming into a feeder. That is a possibility anytime you're putting food out, but for the most part, they're going to stay up there and get what they can from the tops of the trees. Another one of my personal favorites is a gray tree frog. They have special pads in their feet that give them the ability to crawl up surfaces that are impassable to many other animals. So this was a picture that I took last year at a presentation about tree frogs, and this is actually on the outside. This frog was climbing up the side of a clear plastic container, and so I was able to get a picture basically from his underside while it was climbing. The pads are made of this hexagonal structure, like each little piece in there of the pad. And then there's grooves around those that are filled with mucus. And so all of this creates a surface tension that they're able to stick to just about anything and crawl up. So when we think about what they're eating small insects. Other frogs and toads are eating similar food, but the tree frog has the ability to crawl up the tree and get to those insects and things that the other frogs can't. And I was doing a little bit of reading about this, and I found that geckos are the other animal that can crawl up walls easily. We don't have them in Ohio, but I did think it was interesting because they have a different structure to the pad in their foot that allows them to crawl. And researchers have been using what they know from tree frogs and from geckos to help develop better types of brakes, like for cars and things like that. So there's a lot that we can learn from these adaptations and from these animals, and just, you know, how they're constructed and how that might be a benefit to us as well. And then, you know, maybe this one's a little bit more simple, but just the fact that birds can fly. The only other, well, I mean, insects can fly too, but the only other larger animals like this would be bats that can fly. And some of them do live in trees, but they're not using the same habitat for the most part. So having the ability to fly, birds can get to the top of trees where a lot of other animals can't get to. Wings and feathers are part of what makes this possible, but the other cool thing about birds is that they have hollow bones. So if you think about looking down a straw, they have a rigid outside to the bone, but most of the space on the inside is empty. And this makes them lighter for flying. It still gives them a rigid structure, to be an animal and get around and do what it needs to do. But it's lighter so that it's able to expend less energy towards flight. When we look at nesting behavior, this one is an oven bird, and it gets their name from the shape of their nest. It does look similar to the wood thrush that I put up earlier. So it's got the brown coloration on the back, and then it's got a white underside with the spots as well. This one is smaller, but it kind of gives you the same, you can see how this one blends in then with the leaves and things around it just based on the color, and that brighter white area is hidden when things are looking down from above. These get their name from the shape of their nest, which sort of resembles a Dutch oven, and they nest on the ground. They use the leaf litter to obscure and protect the nest. And they're also mostly ground foragers. They find invertebrates among the leaf litter. And as I said, then they've got kind of that same camouflage. But being able to nest on the ground, outright wouldn't sound like the safest place to put a nest, because a lot of different things could be walking around along that area that could just happen upon the nest, or could easily find it without having to climb somewhere else. A lot of birds do nest in trees just because it gets them higher away from predators, but there are other things that birds will do to either hide their nest or keep it safe. So this is always one that I've found really interesting, since they nest on the ground and just kind of have a different behavior that way. And then I've always been an insect lover, so I had to throw in at least one insect today. And I liked this picture because you could see the insect and the outline of it. So mimicry is making yourself look like something else. It kind of goes along with camouflage. It can kind of blend in, but a walking stick gets its name from looking like a stick. So insects have 6 legs by definition. When you're looking at this picture, its 2 front legs are actually held straight out in front of it. So those aren't antennae, that's not the front of its body. Its head is actually right there, even with the 2 legs that you see sticking out to the front side. I guess it'd be the middle set of legs. And so they're just typically green when they're juveniles, and then as they get into the adults, then they're going to turn brown, and they look like a stick. As the name implies, they look like a stick that's walking. And so they can just sit very still. They'll put those legs out to look even longer, and hope that predators don't realize that they are something edible. They just look like a part of the tree. There are some caterpillars that do this too. Some of them even go so far as to hold their body off of the branch that they're on, so that it looks like an extra piece of stick, and they'll like kind of even sway with the branches and with the wind, and just try to become part of that tree. Katydids are another one. I didn't have a good picture of that when I decided to add these in, but they basically look like a leaf. So they've got big green wings. They sit up high in the treetops. You probably hear them a lot because they'll trill, do their katydid. But they basically just look like another leaf on the tree. So even for being vocal, as long as they blend in, then they're hoping that predators aren't going to find them.
Hey, Lindsay, yeah. A question about squirrels. So I know, going back a little bit, we had a question about asking why do they have extra skin, and how do they make that extra skin? So is that just an adaptation that happened over time?
Yeah, as far as I know, so there's sort of a similar species, the sugar gliders in Australia have that same sort of makeup of the extra skin. So yeah, it's just maybe I don't understand the question, like you said how they grow it?
Yeah, I guess, did they always have that extra skin, or is it an adaptation that they developed to, adapt, obviously?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be considered an adaptation now. I haven't tracked back to see, like at one time was there just one squirrel species that now has gone into several species. But that is typically how different species will come to be is, either the population gets separated from one another, or they're living in different habitats. And so the ones that say there was a squirrel at one time that just happened to have more skin in those areas and was able to hop better or, glide from tree to tree. If that one is more successful and then breeds more squirrels that have that extra skin, and over time, that's just going to favor the ones that are able to survive and reproduce. And so if the populations get separated and one of them favors a specific adaptation, and then the other area, based on the things that are there, favors a different adaptation, once they're different enough, then they can be considered different species. Does that kind of answer, we think? If we need more to that, we can come back to that later too, or I can follow up even after this.
Thanks.
Okay. So where do we want to look for wildlife? Go outside, or I'll be honest right now, these are my binoculars and my field guides. I pulled these out just this morning and added this picture because I realized I've just been keeping them right next to my window in our kitchen. We actually have some trees and stuff right behind our house, and so I've got a mixture of species that are coming in. We've still got some feeders up, and then just the edge there, I've even had like a wood thrush hopping around on the ground. So we just want to go out and look. If you're looking for forest habitat specifically, you can find these on lots of state properties. Wildlife areas have forests. There are state forests. State parks have forests. I'm sure there's many local parks and other public areas close to you that would still have. So I don't want that map earlier to be misleading. It showed a lot of the green area as forest cover in Southeast Ohio. That's where we have the larger tracts of forest, and we consider this the forested, unglaciated portion of Ohio. But there are still forests and patches that are still considered old growth forests that have been there for a long time in other parts of the state. So I should have mentioned that earlier. Don't let that map confuse you that those are the only places that you can find forests. And there's not a specific size that says it has to be this big or whatever to be a forest. If you've got some trees in an area together, it can draw in some of those species too. If you're hoping to see things in trees though, since that's what we're talking about, binoculars are going to be especially helpful because things are going to be farther away, and especially some of these birds are small and they move a lot. So I do just want to add in that, so I've got a couple of guides here. These are my guides from college and another one that I had picked up over time. These are the two that I like to carry with me. But don't get consumed with your guides, especially if you've got some binoculars out. Look at the animal. So we'll use birds as an example because, they spend a lot of times in trees. I know a lot of people like bird watching. You get your eyes on the bird, you're looking through your binoculars, and then the first thing, or at least this is my first nature, I know a lot of people are the same way, you want to pull out your guidebook and immediately figure out what you saw. And by the time you've got your book out and you flipped through the pages to the area where you think it might be, now the bird is gone. So my biggest advice in that is watch the bird, or whatever it is. You want to make as many mental notes as you can of different characteristics that you saw. And some of that could be the things that we talked about today. What shape is the beak? That's going to help you decide maybe what it's eating. How big is the bird? Is it grasping with its feet, or is it standing on the ground, or whatever? If you can get some of those descriptors while you're looking at the bird, because they do move quickly and they might leave and they might not come back. I've had that happen to me multiple occasions. So, watch the bird, watch the insect, whatever it is that you're looking at, and try to get as many of those field markers as possible. And then once you think that you've got a pretty good idea, or once that animal has moved out of view, then you can open your field guides. And I know that that's hard, but I really think that that is one of the most helpful pieces of advice that I ever got. And so I always try to stress that as well. And if you don't have field guides, Division of Wildlife has quite a few for different species. And we are in the process of getting those all on the current website so that you can get them in a PDF. And I will note too, I had trouble downloading one the other day. Just try a different browser. I'm having that issue with several things, not just our website, just in general. It seems like some browsers work better for others for different things with just trying to get to those. So, we have identification things available. And then we also, I get emails and calls periodically, people describing things to me or sending me pictures. If it's a clear picture and we can help, we will. And then you can also report sightings of wildlife on our website. There are specific ones that we are looking for. Not every single species are we looking for the sightings on, but some people then do get into citizen science projects. eBird and iNaturalist are some of the two most popular that I know people are involved with. So if you have lists for being out birding for a day, iNaturalist will also help provide identification for it if you upload the picture just from other users who are familiar with those animals. And it's just a good way to keep track of your lists if that's something that you want to do and would like a place to contribute data. And then if you are a forest landowner, the Division of Wildlife has private lands biologists who can help you manage those areas for wildlife. And it could be any type of wildlife. If you have a patch and you want to encourage warblers and songbirds and things to migrate through, if you want to have wild turkey on your property, all those different things, they can help make recommendations based on what you have, species-wise in terms of your trees, so your food source, based on your location, whether that's going to be possible to get those species there, things like that. If you have questions more closely related to the actual trees there, the Division of Forestry has service foresters. And these two positions work well together, and they all know each other and overlap in some areas. So depending on what your goals are, and these are people that can come visit your property, like take an actual look at what you've got, talk to you about what goals you have for the property, and help you come up with a plan. Another source I'll put out there is Call Before You Cut. A lot of people that have trees in their property, if they decide they want to sell them for the timber or whatever, this is a free service, much like a service forester, but this will provide resources on what you should know before you start contracting that work out or before you contact anybody about cutting it. These people work in your interest to help you make the best decisions for you. And then a newer organization, there is a Southeast Ohio chapter that had started, and I believe there's one in the Northeast part of the state too, is Women Owning Woodlands. So if you are a female woodland owner, they had some different activities here in Southeast Ohio, and just trying to get more women involved in that aspect of things. So that has been a newer thing in Ohio, but it seems to have taken off well here in Southeast Ohio, so I'm kind of excited to see what they do with that. For the private lands biologist I've got this stuff in here. For the private lands biologist, these, I'll leave this slide up for a little bit. These are how we have designated our breakdown of the state. So like I said, I'm here in Athens. That's the District 4 office, and so you can call the number here and ask about talking to a private lands biologist. It'd be the same for the other areas as well. Or you can go to the website and get information about the service foresters as well. Or if you talk to the private lands biologist, they can always flip you over to the service forester too, if that would be somebody who's more equipped to handle those questions. So I will leave this one up for a minute. Oh, no, I won't. Okay, I'll leave that one up for a minute if anybody wants to write down the contact information and if there are any other questions.
Sorry, Lindsay, I was on mute. I do that sometimes. So I asked these questions to Jamie and to Meredith, so I'm going to kind of continue it and ask you as well.
Okay.
So can you tell us what your favorite animal adaptation is? And then also, what about the strangest adaptation that you've heard of or weirdest?
Ooh, I really think the tree frogs are one of my favorite, like, and the more I've learned about their feet is just fascinating. Like, you know, at first I always just thought they were sticky or something, but as you learn about the makeup of those all the little pieces that make up the whole pad of their foot and how that works together to create surface tension. And then just, I think they're cool animals anyway. That first picture that I had up on the title slide, you know, had the big croaking and stuff like that. Strangest adaptation. I still think woodpeckers are really weird. Like, I just think that constant pounding would give me a headache. And it seems like they have to work a lot harder for their food than some of the others.
Awesome. And then can you tell us what your background is? So we've had some people interested in how you get to do the job that you do, because it seems like a really cool job.
Yeah, I grew up on a farm and spent a lot of time outside and just watching things. And so I was always kind of fascinated with the animals that I saw around my house and what was going on with that. And I think I was in 6th grade, I told my parents, I'm going to be a wildlife biologist. And, you know, like other things, they're kind of like, okay, you know, this, you know, by the time you actually get to deciding what you want to do. And I just never changed my mind. So I went to school for wildlife management. I've got my bachelor's degree from Ohio State University. And then I worked at a wildlife area for almost 2 years, doing some seasonal intern type work, and just, you know, got more on the job experience of actually managing things for wildlife. And then when this opportunity came available, like, I've always enjoyed talking to people, and so it seems sort of like a natural fit. Is like, well, I have this background and, you know, what we do for wildlife, sort of the habitat management, things like that. And then now I get to go tell people all about it. And so, yeah, I think it's been almost 11 years now since I've been doing this job. And there's, you know, been a lot of things come and go from that, but it's been a good fit for me.
Awesome. And then I want to point out that I shared in the Q&A the link for our YouTube playlist. So if anybody wants to go back and watch the webinars, you know, we've talked about grasslands, wetlands, and now forests. So if anybody wants to check out those other ones, they can do that. And then Lindsay has a super cute video. It's one of my favorite, the belly hike with your kids. Could you maybe just briefly touch on how you can do a belly hike at home for families that are watching today?
Yeah, and actually, if you've already done it, it would be cool to go out now and do it again to compare what you saw before and what you see now. So I just took my kids out in the yard and we laid down on our bellies. If you have a magnifying glass or something that can, you know, I've got like some magnifying sheets at different times too. But you don't need that either because you're going to be pretty close to the grass. So you're just going to, from where you are, if you need to designate an area, I've seen people use hula hoops or just like a small circle or square thing to put down, say you're just checking in this area. But you basically just want to get down close. If we think about the things that are living in the grass or in our yard are going to be smaller types of insects and organisms. So you just want to get down close and see what you can find there. It was kind of early in the year when we did it. We mostly found, we had some flowers there and some seeds that were blowing through. My niece and nephew were really excited to do it after that. They found some ants. You might be able to find a worm, things like that. And you could compare different areas too. So as we've talked about different habitats throughout these, you could do it. You could do it in your driveway. You could do it in the grass. You could do it in an area where the two meet and see what's coming and going back and forth and things like that. So, I think, the video was fun. We only had a couple minutes to just do it right there, but I think you can expand on that by doing it in different locations and kind of comparing or at different times of year and things like that, just to see what all is there.
Awesome. Yeah, there's some super cool videos on there. And if you post any pictures that you take of awesome animal adaptations, tag us on social media and then hashtag awesome adaptations. And before we wrap it up, we do have a question from Fossil Fan who joined us today. They asked, is a moose and deer's antlers a bone or keratin? And Jen had responded that they are bone, but I thought if other people, might be interested in that, if they were wondering the same thing, maybe you can address it too, Lindsay?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing because they grow them each year and then they drop off. So yeah, they are a bone. So we had a presentation. I'm probably not going to get all the details exactly right, but there was a presentation at the Wildlife Diversity Conference this past spring. And I know he was talking about, it's kind of an abnormal growth pattern when you think about bone, especially because these are adult animals already. And most of our bone growth is put on as we're growing to that adult stage. And so there's actually some cancer research that has been done using antlers. Why is it growing like that? What is allowing it to grow since it's sort of an unusual growth. So I hope that answers that question. I don't know if Jen wants to chime in anything else she might have remembered from that, but do you want me, Alyssa, not to be rude, I don't have my little box went away for me to stop sharing my screen because I was going to swap it back over to all of us, but I can't find it.
That's okay. That's all right. Jen, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, their antlers are unusual, like Lindsay said, in that they are replaced every year, and that's a unique feature to the deer family. But they're one of the fastest growing bones of any animal in the world, and so it's very unusual. And then Fossil Fan also asked, well, what's the difference between an antler and a horn? And he asked about rhino horns and elephant trunks and things like that. And rhino horns are keratin. That's the same thing your hair and your fingernails are made of, and they are not replaced. Horse hooves and those things too are also the same material. But then an elephant trunk is more like a bone, but it's ivory. So that's all these cool different things that animals have. That's what makes them so much fun to learn about.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, I think that wraps it up for today. So just to remind everyone, next week we're going to be talking about creatures of our streams and rivers. So please join us next Wednesday at 10. And if you want to find out how to hunt for fossils around the state, our folks from the Geological Survey will be joining us on Tuesday at 10 for a live webinar. So thank you to Jen and to Lindsay and to everybody that joined us today. We look forward to seeing you next week.